My sister had always been the sun in my family, the one everyone turned toward, the one whose light everyone pretended made the whole house glow. But the night she announced that her wedding would be held on the exact same day as mine, something subtle shifted inside me. Not broken, not angry, just rearranged, like a picture frame being straightened after hanging crooked for too many years. We were sitting around my parents' dining table, the one polished to such a shine it reflected the chandelier like water. She said it so casually, like telling me the weather, like she hadn't spent her whole life staking her claim on anything that meant something to me. "So, funny coincidence," she said, resting her chin in her hand, as if she were posing for a camera. "Our venue confirmed the date. Turns out it's the same day you picked." My parents laughed first. They actually laughed, a light, delighted sound, as if this was charming, quirky, adorable, like siblings in a sitcom, not two women in a family where one had learned early that her dreams were only allowed if they didn't inconvenience the golden one. "You're fine with that, right?" she asked. Her voice sounded gentle, but it had that shine to it, the kind that blinds you if you look too long. I nodded, just once, small, controlled. Of course, people mistake quiet for weakness all the time. They mistake stillness for surrender. They mistake someone who isn't constantly announcing themselves for someone who isn't paying attention. But attention? Attention was the one thing I had mastered young. The first time I understood that silence could protect me, I was 8 years old. Sienna stood outside our house in a white sundress that made her look like a little angel in a shampoo commercial. Our mother kept fussing with her hair for a local advertisement she'd miraculously booked. "Smile bigger, sweetheart. Turn your chin. Lift your shoulders. Perfect. Just perfect." Behind them, unnoticed, I stood with a lunchbox packed by my own hands, balancing on the concrete step, waiting for someone to notice me, acknowledge me, remember me. No one did. At school, I worked hard, harder than I needed to, because my grades were the only thing that felt like mine. Achievements didn't require permission. They didn't depend on whose spotlight was already taken. I once came home with a math test marked in clean, proud red. A bright 100 circled at the top like a tiny sunbeam, the kind I never got at home. I held it out to show my father. He didn't even lower the newspaper from his face. "Don't wave that around. You'll make your sister feel bad," he said, with the kind of tone people use when they're asking for the salt. I folded that paper quietly, edges lined up, corners sharp, and slid it into the drawer in my room. I didn't cry, not then. I just learned something. Proof of my efforts should stay out of sight. Over the years, the pattern never wavered. When Sienna failed a class, the teacher obviously had it out for her. When I earned straight A's, it was expected, not impressive. When she caught the flu, the world slowed down. When I did, Mom reminded me not to be dramatic. My 13th birthday passed in a blur of frosting and disappointment. She blew out my candles while I was still inhaling to make a wish, because it's fun to celebrate together. The picture of us that year hangs crooked in my parents' hallway. She's front and center, grinning. I'm off to the side, clapping. I became reliable, quietly so, the daughter who handled dishes and bills and tasks that no one thanked me for. The one who made the house run so smoothly, they never noticed how much I did. But reliability is not affection, not warmth, not love, it's utility. And my family adored having a daughter who required no attention while they poured everything into the one who glowed. In high school, I made the mistake of telling Sienna about the boy I liked. Just once. Just one casual confession while braiding her hair. She smiled in the mirror, and the next week, she was holding his hand in the hallway. When I cried, Mom shook her head and said, "Honey, pretty girls get attention. You'll find someone who likes you for your kindness." That was the night I learned to keep my wants to myself. Quiet, sealed, airtight. College wasn't even a debate. When I mentioned scholarships, my father said, "Your sister needs the tuition more. She has potential." That word landed like a stamp on my forehead. Not chosen, not important, not worth investing in. So I accepted a job at 19, sitting in a gray cubicle, typing invoice codes that looked like puzzle pieces I wasn't supposed to solve. My old teacher, Mr. Ellis, helped me apply. "You're sharp, Bonnie," he said. "Don't let anyone make you small." But small felt familiar, predictable, safe. At 22, I moved into a one-bedroom apartment with white walls and furniture arranged like a diagram. Orderly, controlled. Everything color-coded, everything documented in my planner, where neat handwriting replaced the things I never said aloud. Meanwhile, Sienna called constantly, not to ask about me, but to broadcast her latest triumph. A new dress, new followers, new praise. Our parents echoed every story like it was gospel. "She's doing so well," Mom said. "You could learn a thing or two." I nodded again. Silence keeps the fragile things from breaking, but somewhere in all that quiet, something else was forming. Not resentment, not rage, something sharper, something patient, proof, preparation, precision. Because silence, if you pay close attention, isn't the absence of sound. It's the space where plans grow their roots. The night she called to announce her wedding date, a date identical to mine, I was updating the guest list in my planner while rain traced thin silver lines down the window. When her name flashed on my phone, I almost let it ring out. "Hey," she chirped. "Guess what? Looks like my wedding landed on your date. Crazy coincidence, right?" "Coincidence, sure. But you're doing something super small," she continued. "Just family, so it won't clash. Our relatives will be at mine, obviously." She paused. I could hear her smile through the phone. "You're okay with that, right?" I stared at the circle I'd drawn around my date months earlier. My pen pressed down until it bled through the page. "Yes," I said. "I'm okay with it." The thing about silence, it gets misinterpreted all the time, but silence can also be strategy. A few hours later, my mother called. Her voice sparkled with the kind of energy she never used with me. "Sweetheart, your sister's venue is going to be gorgeous. Everyone's coming. You can have yours after. Maybe in a smaller room, or another day. We'll figure it out." "All good," I said softly. And when I said all good, what I meant was, you taught me to shrink. You taught me not to fight. You taught me to fold myself like paper. But maybe it was time to unfold. After the call, I traced the ink on my planner with one fingertip and wrote 2 words beside the date. Do not move. The morning after, I woke before dawn. Something had shifted in the air, not messy or emotional, just steady. Like walking into a room you've cleaned the night before and seeing everything in its place. At work, while my coworkers chatted about brunch plans, I opened the HR portal. My cursor hovered above a blank memo template. Then I began typing an internal invitation to the Reed Carver wedding. Attendance encouraged. Formal attire. Details forthcoming. I didn't send it yet. I didn't have to rush. Every trap is better when it's built quietly. By noon, I'd confirmed the venue. The coordinator hesitated. "You're sure you want the same date?" she asked gently. "The other bride." "I'm sure," I said. "And you want the grand ballroom?" "Yes." Silence again. This one wasn't mine. That night, I told my fiancé, Ethan. He listened, eyebrows raised slightly. "You're not changing it?" "No." He nodded. Slow, controlled. "Then we'll do it right." Part of me expected him to question me, push back, relent. But he didn't. He simply understood the quiet, understood there were battles you didn't announce. You just prepared for them. The days that followed didn't feel vengeful. They felt organized. I finalized the HR memo, sent invitations to executives and department heads, booked musicians, approved lighting, ordered seating charts. Every task landed exactly where it needed to. Silence wasn't weakness, it was precision. My mother called again midweek. "Sweetheart, help your sister decorate on her big day, okay?" "I'll be busy," I said. "Busy? On her wedding?" "Yes." She didn't ask what I meant. She never thought there could be anything in my life large enough to conflict with Sienna's. At night, Ethan and I spread plans across the dining table. He reviewed vendors while I refined details. He looked up at me once and asked, "Does any of this feel like too much?" "Not enough," I said. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Then we keep going." We visited the ballroom the next week. Tall ceilings, crystal chandeliers, ivory drapes that pooled on the floor like soft snow. "It's beautiful," I said, "but nothing excessive. No clutter. Let the quiet speak for itself." The manager nodded. Ethan watched me with something like admiration, or understanding, or both. At home, I found a box of old papers. In it, folded exactly the way I remembered, was the math test with the red 100. I unfolded it next to the rows of printed guest names on my table. Same shape, same silence, but this time I wasn't hiding anything. The night before the wedding, I barely slept. I ironed my dress, polished my shoes, left my planner open by the window where sunrise would touch it first. At 7 a.m., Mom called again. "Sienna's nervous. She thinks you might be jealous." "I'm not," I said. "You're such a good sister." Before she could say anything else, I whispered, not for her, but for myself. "Not anymore. 2 weddings, 1 day, same building. They thought it would crush me. They never realized I'd been preparing for this moment my entire life." The morning of the wedding arrived with a strange kind of stillness, the kind that settles over a city before the traffic wakes up, before the noise begins. The sky hung low, a pale, early light washing over the hotel's glass exterior. Everything felt suspended, like the world was taking one slow breath before exhaling something irreversible. I stepped through the hotel's revolving doors, the soft glide of the glass panels brushing past like a whisper. My dress trailed behind me, quiet against the marble floors. Staff rushed around carrying folded linens, trays of champagne flutes, blocks of fresh ice wrapped in soft cloth. It was the kind of busy that looked effortless if you didn't know better. 2 elegant signs stood at the entrance of the event hall. Ballroom A, Reed Carver Wedding. Ballroom B, Sienna and Nathan. Same hallway, same floor, same air. Every choice she'd made was meant to cast mine deeper into the shadows. Every decision I made in return was meant to remind her that shadows can swallow light if they want to. Our ceremony began at noon sharp. Guests filtered into the room with a soft hush of fabric and murmured greetings. The chandeliers overhead glimmered with a kind of restrained luxury. Nothing gaudy, nothing loud. Ethan squeezed my hand once, just before stepping into position. When the string quartet began their first notes, the music trembled through the floorboards all the way into my ribs. The aisle felt impossibly long and entirely too short at the same time. Faces blurred together, co-workers, executives, people who had only ever known me as someone steady, quiet, reliable. I wondered what they saw now, a bride or something else. When Ethan and I spoke our vows, the room fell into a listening kind of silence, the kind that feels holy even if you're not religious. His voice was warm, anchored. Mine didn't shake the way I expected it to. We said, "I do," under a wash of chandelier light. And when the applause rose, it sounded soft but full, honest, like a room exhaling at last. But beyond those tall windows, in the courtyard below, a different story was unraveling. Down there, framed by manicured hedges and expensive flowers, stood my sister in her lace gown, staring at her phone like it was betraying her in real time. Her groom, Nathan, paced beside her with sharp, anxious movements. Every few steps, he lifted his phone to his ear, only to lower it again with a frustrated shake of his head. Their photographer hovered awkwardly, trying to avoid catching the increasingly frantic expressions on their faces. Half her guests, the ones she assumed would naturally choose her, weren't showing up. And the ones who did were messaging her excuses about a mandatory corporate event happening at the same time. She looked beautiful and furious, like a star realizing its orbit just shifted without permission. By the time Ethan and I made our way into our reception, their panic had escalated into something close to disbelief. And an hour into the celebration, the doors to Ballroom A opened again, not quietly this time. There they were, my parents, Sienna and Nathan, dressed to perfection, standing in the doorway of the ballroom they hadn't been invited to. Their confusion was so vivid I could almost taste it in the air. My mother's smile froze first. My father's eyebrows drew together. Nathan stiffened at the sight of the crowd. Executives, board members, influential guests, all gathered under the very lights my sister believed would belong to her. Sienna blinked once, twice. Her voice dropped to a whisper sharp enough to cut glass. What is happening? Why are all of my guests here? Nathan stepped back a little, visibly shaken. These are my company's clients, most of the board. What are they doing at your sister's wedding? The murmurs in the room hushed into a curious low tide. And then Ethan's father, Mr. Carver, stood up. He didn't lift his voice. He didn't need to. Power rarely has to shout. It's interesting, he said, each word deliberate. 2 weddings on the same day, same venue complex, but only one of them includes my son. His voice traveled across the room with perfect clarity, the microphone catching the calm weight of each syllable. My mother's smile flickered like a candle in the wind. We didn't realize, she began. You didn't need to realize, Mr. Carver said, cutting her off gently but unmistakably. Some people only understand boundaries when they run into them. Sienna tried to laugh, but it came out thin and cracked. She reached for Nathan's arm. Say something, she whispered. He pulled away slightly. You told me this date wouldn't affect anything. You told me it was just her little wedding. Even from across the room, I saw the word little hit her like a slap. You agreed, she snapped. Their argument scattered through the quiet like shards of glass. Guests exchanged glances. Cameras flashed discreetly. Somewhere in the back, someone cleared their throat in discomfort. Me? I didn't move. I stood with a glass in my hand, the stem cool between my fingers, the same calm posture I'd held the night she told me about her date. My planner sat closed on the table nearby, resting beside the guest book, as still and clean as the life I was about to step into. Mr. Carver turned toward the staff and spoke quietly. Let's allow the bride and groom to enjoy their evening. The staff moved with soft efficiency, guiding the 4 of them toward the exit. No hostility, no spectacle. Just the firm, polite removal of a disruption. Like quiet returning to a room after too much noise. The doors closed behind them with a sound softer than a sigh. And as if on cue, the string quartet shifted into a new melody, low and elegant, smoothing the air back into something warm and celebratory. Ethan brushed his fingers against mine. They're gone, he said simply. I know. Through the door's frosted glass panel, I saw a shadow lunge forward. A slam, maybe, or a stomp. Someone losing their composure in Ballroom B. Then silence. I took a sip of wine, letting the taste settle. They expected me to fold, I said softly. And instead, Ethan murmured. I tilted my glass, watching the liquid settle into stillness. I showed them what silence can build. We touched our glasses together. Not in triumph, in equilibrium. The rest of the evening unfolded in a rhythm I'd never experienced before. Calm, steady, without the underlying tension that had followed me from childhood into adulthood like a second shadow. Guests laughed, conversations bloomed, music drifted through the room like a breath held and finally released. By the end of the night, when the last song faded and the last guest stepped out into the warm evening air, I stood in the glow of the chandeliers and looked at the polished floor reflecting my silhouette. Unbroken, uninterrupted, fully mine. The silence they'd always expected from me had finally changed shape. Not a cage, not a muzzle, a choice, and a beginning. The morning after the wedding felt different in a way I couldn't quite name. Not lighter, not heavier, just clearer, like someone had wiped condensation off a window I'd been trying to look through my whole life. Sunlight crept across the kitchen tiles in thin golden stripes. I stood barefoot at the counter, stirring sugar into my coffee. The spoon tapped the side of the mug in a slow, steady rhythm. Something inside me matched that rhythm, falling into step with it. Ethan was still asleep. His breathing drifted down the hallway like a quiet reassurance that the world hadn't tilted too far overnight. On the dining table lay two things side by side: my planner, closed for the first time in weeks, and our marriage certificate, its embossed seal catching a small glint of morning light. The ink on that paper was deeper, richer, more permanent than anything I'd ever dared to claim. For years, I'd folded parts of myself into tight corners: achievements, feelings, small triumphs, pain, anything that risked casting a shadow on my sister. But yesterday, without shouting, without fighting, without drawing blood, I'd finally unfolded them. It didn't feel like revenge. Not really. More like alignment. I sat down, letting the warmth from the coffee seep into my palms. The apartment was so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator and the low whisper of the city outside. Chicago in the morning had always sounded like someone gently turning a page. I wondered how the morning sounded at my parents' house. Maybe my mother was pacing around the kitchen, phone in hand, waiting for me to call so she could demand an explanation she believed she deserved. My father would be pretending to read the paper, though I knew the creases in the pages would be too crisp for that to be true. And Sienna. I imagined her waking up in a guest room, the silence hitting her like a cold wind. No flood of congratulatory messages, no flood of tagged photos, no flood of praise, just questions, just confusion, just the realization that for the first time in her life, attention wasn't guaranteed. I didn't revel in it. I didn't even smile at the thought. What I felt was distance, wide, honest distance. Like standing on opposite sides of a river that had always been there, only now the fog had finally lifted enough for us both to see it. The kettle began to whistle softly. Without thinking, I moved to switch it off before the sound could build into something shrill. I'd had enough sharp noises in my life. A few minutes later, Ethan shuffled into the kitchen, hair sticking up in a soft, endearing mess, eyes half open. "Morning," he murmured. "Morning." He leaned against the counter, watching me with that gentle patience he carried like a second heartbeat. "You okay?" I nodded, and for the first time in a long time, the word felt whole when it left my mouth. "Yes." Finally. "Yes." He didn't ask about the wedding. He didn't bring up my family. He didn't probe the quiet. He knew the difference between silence that cages and silence that heals. We had plans to meet his parents for brunch later, but he didn't mention it yet. Neither of us was in a hurry to disrupt the peace. When he went to shower, I opened the window a little. The cool air drifted in, carrying the scent of rain from the night before, mixed with the yeasty sweetness from the bakery downstairs. Somewhere far away, a train horn sounded, deep, distant, fading. I opened my planner one last time. The pages were slightly warped from weeks of notes, lists, confirmations, reminders, evidence of how deliberately I'd moved through each step. On the very last page, beneath the schedule I'd written in neat blue ink, I drew a single line: clean, straight, final, Reed Carver wedding, completed. Then I closed the planner and set it beside the certificate. For a moment, the morning light touched both, blending them into one quiet, shared reflection. There was no guilt, no regret, no lingering wish that things had unfolded differently. If anything, I felt steady. Families like mine don't crumble in dramatic explosions. They break in small, predictable ways. A cracked expectation here, a withheld apology there. A lifetime of tiny imbalances that eventually become too heavy to carry. Yesterday didn't destroy anything. It simply revealed the truth of what had already been broken. Silence, I realized, doesn't always mean someone has nothing to say. Sometimes it means someone has finally stopped asking for permission to exist. The morning grew brighter. The street below was waking up. People opened shop doors. Dogs tugged their owners toward grassy patches. Cars hummed through puddles left from last night's rain. Life continued with or without the applause of the people who once controlled my world. As I sipped my coffee, a soft knock sounded on the door. I knew who it was even before I opened it. My mother stood in the hallway, still wearing the dress she'd worn to Sienna's wedding, the one she never made it to. Her makeup had faded around her eyes, and she looked smaller somehow, less certain. "Bonnie," she said, trying to sound composed, "we need to talk." But the thing was, for the first time in my life, I didn't need to, and that truth settled over me like the final piece of a long, complicated puzzle sliding quietly into place. She waited in the hallway like a small, contrite storm, my mother, hair slightly mussed, dress still holding the creases from the night before. For a second, she looked like she had come to ask forgiveness. For another, like she'd come to argue. Both would have been familiar. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. She entered and set her purse on the table without ceremony. Her hands trembled a little as she did it, and in that tremor, I saw something I hadn't admitted to myself yet. She was startled, not by me, but by the vacancy I'd left where compliance used to live. "We need to talk about last night," she began. Her voice carried that practiced calm, the one used for PTA meetings and charity luncheons. But when she said "we," the world seemed to shrink to the two of us in my kitchen, the morning light making dust motes hang like tiny lanterns. "You're right," I answered. "We do." She took a breath, then another. "Bonnie, your sister is devastated. This was a terrible mistake. She thought..." Her voice faltered. She hadn't planned for this part, the part where her words might not land where she intended them to. "She thought what?" I asked, not unkindly. It was a rhetorical question, an invitation for her to fill in the silences she'd left empty for me all these years. She thought people would show up for her, that she... My mother's eyes glazed for a moment, like she was trying to find the exact script that would make the situation less painful for everyone involved. She thought attention was owed to her. I finished for her. My voice was quiet, but precise. "And she's not alone there." My mother searched my face. For years, she's been practiced at looking at me as if I were a little girl, softening her features, coaxing me down to a size she could manage. Today, she seemed to be looking at someone she'd misremembered the contours of. "Bonnie, I know you feel..." she started. "Small?" I supplied. She blinked. "Ignored? Invisible? I know." She drew in a slow breath. "We didn't know it would be such a mess." "No," I said. "You did." She flushed, and for a moment the color in her face made her look younger. Like the woman before motherhood, before the household rehearsals and discreet moral instructions. "We weren't thinking it through," she said in a softer voice. "We only thought, Sienna's been so successful lately. She got the ad campaign. She's been doing well. We were proud." "You were proud of the picture she made for you," I said, "not the person she is." The kettle hissed softly in the background, an ordinary sound that anchored the room. "I'm sorry," she said then, and the phrase landed awkwardly between us. It was the kind of apology people say when something has gone wrong that affects them socially, a casual remorse for embarrassment rather than for harm. I wanted to tell her I'd been waiting for years for something more like contrition, for a confession, for the admission that her love had been selective. Instead, I took a breath and let the silence sit cleanly in the air. "Your apology is noted," I said finally. But what I did wasn't about making anyone look bad. It wasn't about winning. It was about taking space I'd been taught not to take. She set her hands on the table, fingers interlaced. "We never wanted you to feel small. You never wanted me to feel small," I echoed. But choosing Sienna and telling me to be supportive felt like a decision in favor of one child over the other. It felt like a hierarchy, Mother. It felt like the works of a household selecting a favorite. Her expression shifted, and I could see the old defenses flicker, denial like a reflex, guilt like a tide coming up too fast. For a moment, she seemed on the verge of collapsing under the weight of what had been unsaid for so long. "Bonnie, You made a scene, she said finally, as if scoring the incident would make it smaller. You used connections. You pulled executive invites. You maneuvered the whole thing. That's not how— She stopped. It's how I had to, I said. It's how I could make them see the consequences of their choices without a spectacle. It's a quiet consequence. It's effective. My sister is hurt. Her voice sharpened. She's embarrassed. So am I cut in. For different reasons. For years I watched you prioritize someone else's image over my presence. For years I swallowed homework ribbons and love notes, folded them into drawers, and told myself it was okay. Yesterday wasn't petty revenge. It was the sum of a lot of small truths. She shut her eyes, and I watched the ghost of the woman who had rocked me fall away from her face. When she opened them again, they were clearer but older. I don't know what to do now, she whispered. Start by listening, I said simply. Not defending, not explaining, just listening. And if you want to repair anything, repair without making apologies into a production. Don't try to fix a hurt with a gift. It never works that way. She nodded as if committing the words to memory. Then she spoke softly. Is there anything that can be salvaged between you and Sienna? I considered the question, watching the steam from the kettle curl into the light. Families like ours survive on rituals. A cake at a birthday, a shared holiday meal, a photograph framed on a mantle. Maybe those things could still exist between us, but only if we shifted what they meant. Possibly, I allowed. But not if we keep pretending one sister's life is a stage while the other's is a footnote. She looked at me, the shape of her face softening. For a heartbeat, I almost saw the woman who once held my hand on scraped knees, who once read me 2 extra chapters at bedtime. That woman had been replaced by a practical version who knew what to say at brunch and how to write a check. But she wasn't gone. Bonnie, she said at last, and the name sounded tentative, like a key being turned. I'm proud of you, in my own way. It hit me like a small, unexpected wind. Not enough to heal, but enough to crack the ice a little so light could filter through. Then be proud in public, I said. Let your pride be visible when you talk about me. Don't bury it under stories about Sienna. She nodded again, slow and deliberate. There was a pause, an empty space between us that had weight and consequence. Then she stood and reached for my hand. For a moment, I wondered if the old script would snap back into place. The ritualized kiss on the forehead, the murmur of motherly concern followed by the subtle reclamation of authority. Instead, she squeezed my hand, short and awkward, like an apology that didn't have room to say everything it wanted. Let me come over, she said, for dinner, next week, just you and me. I hesitated. It was a small request, but it came with the promise of repetition. One dinner could be a gesture, or it could be the first of many small shifts. All right, I said, next week. She left then, the door closing with a softness that suggested she expected it to open again soon. I stood in the stillness after her departure and wondered what it meant to accept a small invitation from someone who had cultivated silence for so long. After she left, I went back to the table and picked up my planner. The line I'd drawn across the final entry felt like a mark of closure, but not a period, more of a comma. Lives don't end with one well-executed plan. They change, scrawl over in new ink, and continue. Days stretched into weeks. The family phone calls shifted in tone. My mother called less with instructions and more with questions. Casual updates from my father came with small compliments tucked in. Good speech at the office. Saw your photo online. Looked very composed. It was strange and unfamiliar, like tasting a spice I couldn't place. Sienna, on the other hand, reacted in fits and starts. For a while, she retreated into a quieter social media presence. Her posts were fewer, and the comments that once swelled with adoration thinned out, replaced by a different kind of attention, one that looked at the woman behind the image and analyzed her misstep like a puzzle. She texted me once, 3 weeks later, just a message, short, unadorned. Can we talk? I thought of the many ways that could go. A trap dressed as apology, a A request for advice, a demand for consolation. Manipulation had 1,000 forms in our house, and I'd learned them all by watching. We met at a cafe that smelled faintly of lemon and espresso. Sienna arrived with a tight smile and a nervous laugh that thinned as she sat down. She ordered water, and for a moment, she looked less like someone performing for a room and more like a woman trying to remember how to be herself. "You looked great that day," she said, before we'd even settled in. It sounded like a rehearsed line and also like a truth she'd practiced saying. "Thank you," I said. She reached across the table, then withdrew her hand. I didn't expect people not to show up," she said. "I thought everyone loved me the way you always said they did." I leaned back, watching her. The vulnerability was real, and for a small, sharp second, my chest eased in a way I hadn't known it would. "People love stories," I said. "They love narratives that are easy to follow, and your life, it's been a pleasant, easy narrative to cheer for." She nodded, a small tear threatening to spill. But it was embarrassing. For the first time, I felt invisible in a way I never had before. "It's different," I said. "There's a difference between that kind of social silence and the kind I grew up in. But I get it. Feeling invisible is a narrow, sharp thing." We talked for hours, half apology, half inventory of past hurts. Sienna confessed small things I didn't expect. The way parents' praise had become molasses, thick and sticky and heavy. The way she'd learned to perform so the light didn't shift away from her. The fear that if she stopped being bright and pretty, she wouldn't be seen at all. It surprised me to hear her fear. I'd assumed she'd never needed to worry. But the truth is that every role comes with its own isolation. Her armor was applause, mine was stillness. Both can be lonely. We didn't fix everything that day. Who fixes families in a single afternoon? But we started. She asked for space, which felt honest. She said she wanted to understand. I asked for reciprocity, not extra praise, but equal presence. "You should come to Mom and Dad's for Thanksgiving," she said awkwardly at one point. "We could try to actually be together." I hesitated. The old scripts are comfortable in their repetition. Breaking them felt risky, but staying in them felt like being trapped in a gallery where the same painting rotted a little more each year. "All right," I said, "we can try." We left the cafe with something new in our pockets. Awkward hope. Not triumphant, not clean. Just the kind of hope that people who live together as a family sometimes allow themselves. Cautious, practical, and persistent. Weeks turned into months. The family dynamic did not do a complete about-face, but it did tilt. A tilt is different from repentance. It's quieter. It's the sort of thing that starts to alter how you sit at the table, who gets to speak first, whose successes are announced and applauded equally. At work, the ripple had other effects. Colleagues who had once seen me as a silent fixture now asked me for my opinion. Invitations to board dinners arrived with fewer strings attached. People in rooms I'd never been invited to before began to recognize my name and call me by it, Bonnie, without that air of casual diminishment that had followed me for years. The planner stayed on my desk, but I no longer used it solely to map the secret architecture of my life. It became a place to sketch plans that were unapologetically mine. Travel, a small writing course, a renewed application to a graduate program I'd shelved years ago. It was like giving myself permission to consider a future that wasn't framed by anyone else's expectations. One evening, sometime after the changes had settled into something like a new normal, I found my father in the living room surrounded by papers. He looked up when I entered and smiled, the kind where he forgot for a second that adults had to be careful with their expressions. "You look different," he said, "more present." "That's one way to put it," I said, and he chuckled because he recognized the truth of it, even if he couldn't name it. He reached across and ruffled my hair the way only fathers do when they're trying to hold on to the memory of a child. I let him for a second, because old rituals have their own soft power. "We're doing better," he said. "Your mother and I, we've been talking." "We have a lot to talk about," I said. Yes, we do. And in that small exchange was the tacit agreement that nothing would slide back into former patterns overnight. It would take time, a lot of it, but time moves in one direction, and sometimes, if you give it enough repetitions, the axis of a life tilts. There were rough edges. Of course, there were. Not everyone recovered gracefully. Not everyone wanted to. Some relatives whispered. Some friendships frayed. But the people who mattered, the ones who saw beyond performance or silence, stayed. On a late summer night, as the city hummed like a distant engine, I sat on my small balcony with a cup of tea and my planner open. The pages were full of appointments and small adventures. Under the margin, I had written in a loop, less compliance, more curiosity. I closed the planner and watched the lights across the river blink and breathe. In the distance, a train called out, familiar and steady. Silence still existed in my life, but it had changed shape. It was no longer a place I disappeared into. It was a deliberate choice to create space for my life to speak and to choose what would fill that space. When I thought of my sister now, it wasn't with the hard edge of old resentments. It was with a softer, wary compassion. We had both been playing parts written for us by others, and we were learning to improvise our own lines. And sometimes, when the house was quiet and the city's chorus dimmed into a lullaby, I could almost hear a new kind of conversation starting, one with fewer scripts, fewer expectations, and more honest, careful listening. It would not be perfect, nothing human is, but it would be ours.